capsizing.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
That's what happens.
Yeah, you got it. Okay, we will go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to our final stakeholder meeting before we go to City Council. Who needs a copy of the agenda? We're just going to go ahead and pass this around. You can take one. We will start with welcome and introductions because we maybe might have a new face or two with us today to the stakeholder group. I'm Olivia Huff from the Planning Department.
Cora Scott, Public Information.
Randall Donig, City of Springfield Planning and Zoning Commission.
Marcy Kirkup, Galloway Village Neighborhood Association.
Betsy Johnson, Galloway Village Neighborhood Association.
Melanie Bach, Galloway Village Neighborhood Association.
Ron Petering with the city's Environmental Services Department.
Amy Vandiamy, Firehouse Pottery.
H.E. Jansen, the Greenways intern, and I also work at Galloway in 4x4, at 4x4.
Mary Cromley, Ozark Greenway.
Clausen, City of Springfield Public Works.
Mary Smith, Planning Department.
And I know Melanie is sitting in for Wendy today. She had emailed me about that. Wendy had a photo shoot today, and I believe that Jessica Pearson will be joining us. So I think that might be all. Hopefully Jared joins us. So those are two that we are actually missing right now. We'd like to start with just kind of an overview of the results of the second online survey. So thank you all for getting that survey out because we had 340 surveys completed. And we had 370 and maybe some change start the survey, give some input, and then not complete the survey. So we had a 90% completion rate, still pretty good. What we saw, I don't know that we had any huge surprises. You know, when we were asking people about ranking priorities and what's most important to them, what came back with was limiting multifamily uses to the lower density side as a top priority, and tree preservation, once again, was way up there at the top. What I did think was interesting, though, is everything we put out there got some votes. So, and we had a lot of comments as well. We had over 150 written comments on the survey. So that was good. We did have lots of people write in about wanting to retain that village feel, you know, just having some design constraints. Something I thought was interesting is people seem to be very much in favor of sign limitations. And even in written comments talked about how people in the district had done a good job with signs, but keeping them the way they are now instead of having larger signs or backlit signs, that type of thing. And they were less interested in limiting exterior glazing. So I thought that was interesting. I mean, it was about a 75% or so were in favor of the signage limitations, with only about 25% thinking that glazing was really important. But we continued to see things like a barrier between the trail and the greenway as very high importance, possibly some limitations or restrictions on how close the trail could be to the street, additional landscaping, green space preservation, those types of things were definitely the top priorities. Now, we did have the question where we talked about heights of buildings with frontage heights along the street, giving some options for 2-story, 3-story, or 2 to 3-story on the street with more stories height off the street. And what was interesting, out of those 3 options, they were all fairly close together. The number one people liked was the lower height restriction, the one that would be 2-story on the street. Then we had, what was interesting is the second most popular was the one that was the higher height restriction, with the moderate one being in the middle. So it's kind of like, it was all over the board on that one, really. But there were some written comments that went along with that. And I'm working on just kind of a one-page summary of the survey results, and Public Information Office has helped. We have all the raw data in Excel spreadsheets, and we have charts and things. It's just kind of interesting the way that we ask the questions. The charts come out with actually an inverse relationship. So if something got a lot of number one priority votes, it's actually shown as a smaller bar. So I'm having to kind of redo some of that, because it's actually backwards if I was to print it right now, because something that was like a number 9 way down on the priority list, it's getting to number 9. Anyway, that's an easy thing to correct, but in a nutshell, we're seeing some of the same things. Mostly what we wanted to see is, are we on the right track? Was there anything that was hugely unpopular? And I would think the only thing that really stood out might have been just the exterior glazing. So that's just something of note. Some people liked it, but I think people thought that they liked the variation in architecture and things like that, as long as it wasn't too modern. Some people had written in comments about too modern. So did you all take the online survey? I figured several folks here. It looked like a good mix of people. We had 2,400 and some view the survey. Now, I may have gone in and viewed it every day a little bit. And probably some of our PIO folks as well. Just kind of like checking in, because I know when we first put it out there, there was only maybe 50 or so that had completed. So Public Information issued a press release about it, and then that's how we bumped it up to the 340. So plus you all spread it around, I know, through social media and the neighborhood and everything. So,
Olivia, do you know how many took it after we reopened it?
oh, it was a huge amount.
Yeah, there's quite
It was
only 50 before, and then
it was close to 200.
it was huge.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was worth reopening
and
it.
that really the social media, I think, helped.
Yes, definitely. Well, if there's not any more discussion on that, we took everything into account, and staff has met with the city manager's office. And what we're going to go through today are the recommendations for the area that will be presented to City Council. So these boards that we have here are what we're going to be taking for public input on the 9th, the upcoming meeting. You'll recognize a lot of common themes that we've discussed throughout this whole process, and the ones that have risen to the top of the priority list are here. Now, what you may realize is we have categorized these slightly different than maybe you have seen them categorized before. We in the past had we had a whole category that was parks and trails. Now we have 4 different categories, and we're going to present them in kind of priority order. So, number 1 priority being public safety recommendations, since that was a big one. I know you all said about like trail users, pedestrian crossings, the roadways, things like that, and it's City Council's top priority, public safety. So as we present this to City Council, we'll start with public safety recommendations, move into natural environment recommendations. We actually have 2 boards titled image enhancement. That's where you're going to see your design and development recommendations. And then finally, our general recommendations. I'm always, the way I had first kind of outlined this is starting with general recommendations, because I like to start broad and get closer down in. But the general recommendations would be things that would apply area-wide and would have multiple responsible parties. So these are things that maybe the neighborhood could work on doing, and they're a little bit broader and more comprehensive. So starting with public safety recommendations, we have improved traffic flow and safety. The improvements to Galloway Street corridor and the intersections at Battlefield and Lone Pine, and Lone Pine and Galloway, and Lester and Lone Pine, for years have been a top community-wide priority, and then we were continuing to hear that there was need for increased pedestrian or bicycle traffic safety to help improve flow and reduce potential conflicts. So this is the design concept that was presented at the Public Works Open House meeting, and we received lots of public comment on that. So of course the recommendation is going to be to move forward with those, and then how we move forward with those. Actually, some of that gets into the image enhancement and general recommendations, but we got a lot of public comments about some beautification efforts in the roundabouts, something eye-catching, maybe some plantings, and it looks like that could be accommodated as part of the design moving forward. And improve safety for street edge parking. Lots of discussion on this. So this is parking that technically is off-street, but maybe looks like it's on the street. By clearly delineating the parking areas, whether it would be a different color, a line, some type of visual contrast between the two areas with material, and especially moving forward. I know people were talking about thinking that this whole area was more of a parking lot, pedestrians walking in the street. We heard lots of anecdotal on that, so we've taken that into account. Maybe if I move this up here, you guys can see this a little bit better. I realize at this scale, it's hard to see everything. This is a photo of the existing Greenway Trail and Lone Pine, and you can see that Public Works has installed the temporary bollards here, but one recommendation would be to install a physical barrier, some type of fencing that fits in the area, whether it was wooden fencing or tree plantings. That's shown as an example over here. The city has installed no parking signs, and I just saw those down there the other day, and I think they're well placed because they're installed right where you would think someone would pull in and park. So, some things like that to help with, especially during public events, and to work on some shared parking to address that. Address flooding, and Wendy's not here today, but she gets photo credit for this one that was taken in the most recent spring flooding event that happened, where the manhole cover popped off here, and this is a view looking south along Lone Pine. And flooding has been an issue in the area since we have a record of it on the 1978 flood insurance maps, but we recognize that this is an issue here and has been an issue for a long time, and there are stormwater drainage needs in the area that are going to be looked at. We need to actually have calculations to figure out what needs to be done there. It requires an easement from the rail, is that correct?
Yeah.
Eric, and I don't know, Eric, do you have anything else to add on that one?
Chris knows more about that than I do, but I know there's other improvements that need to occur. But again, that takes coordination with the railroad. Some of those were done with the most recent development, but additional improvements need to occur farther downstream.
And I know some studies have been completed maybe 5 years ago or something that showed that it was maybe 4 feet below base flood elevation, but new studies are needed and basically a new strategy to help with that area. Enhance the safety and quality of the Galloway Creek Trail. We recognize that this is one of the oldest and most heavily used trails in the entire city. Greenways recognizes that. Public Works. Of course, there's funding secured for the new trail, concrete, from the park to Republic, and we all know about that moving forward, but to continue to maintain the trail in good working condition. And we have additional trail and greenway recommendations under the image enhancement section as well. So that, in a nutshell, is going to be, those are our public safety pieces. And then we have one board on natural environment. And this was really, even in our first public input survey, water quality was a #1 priority in the first public input survey. Our second one was more focused on design recommendations and didn't get into water quality as much. But actually, I have learned a lot about water quality and the buffers that we have on the Galloway Creek since starting this. I remember at the second public meeting, people were coming up with recommendations. We need a buffer zone down here. Well, come to find out, we do actually have a creek buffer that's 100 feet on each side of the Galloway Creek. And kind of jumping ahead there, the Galloway Creek requires that streamside buffer, and our recommendation would be just that we adhere to that buffer zone. Right, Mary?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. discourage any kind of exceptions to the zone.
Right, right.
What does that mean? 100-foot buffer zone means you can't do anything.
Plant trees, like the only
Natural
Yeah.
state.
It could be left in
Excavation.
its natural state.
So even with some of the improvements that you're talking about, where people are connecting to the stream, pipes to the stream, does that not, is that allowed then, where they're digging up and trenching over to dump water into the stream?
There's exceptions to allowing going across it and getting to it, but they're pretty much you can't do development within that area.
So building development, but we're still then allowing permitting access to drain into the stream.
Mhm.
I think,
And that
correct me
is,
if I'm wrong, but I think that was one of the stream quality issues that we were hearing about, was people were just concerned that people were dumping development
And I
water
think part of
into
it
the
is
stream.
just what Olivia had alluded to before, and that's just that it's all in the floodplain. And so, whether it's piped there or it just naturally gets there when it floods, it's all going to the stream to begin with. So when the road's underwater, I think in the 100-year flood, it's like you said, 2 or 3 feet. The water is 2 or 3 feet above the road. It's hard to have water quality when everything's in a floodplain like that. It's just
I'm trying to think of how to
Yeah.
answer the question. How can I say it? It's one thing for everything to roll down a hill and into the
Mhm.
stream. It's another thing for people to see a culvert installed that channels the water. It's a public perception issue.
Isn't it better though for it to go through that?
I
rather
don't
than
know. I'm
running down
just-
the hillside and bringing gravel and everything with it. I understand what you're saying, but I'm just kind of wondering if it's actually better for it to be channeled directly rather than it just.
Hi, Jessica. Come on in. Let's see. I think we have your nameplate somewhere over here. Bob, do you see Jessica Pearson?
I don't
here?
either. So you can keep going. That was just, I didn't know if you were saying that wouldn't be allowed in the future, or if that still would be permitted in
Well,
the future.
let me say this, because there have been updated water quality standards that the city has that were updated most recently April 2018, I believe. And there's a manual that all new developments have to follow, and it is more stringent. Ron, do you have anything to add on that?
Well, you were kind of going where I was going to probably make a comment, but water is going to flow through gravity. It's going to get to the stream. It's going to get there one way or another. If it flows over land, then there's some natural filtering mechanisms that are there that are helpful in keeping deposits from getting into the stream. And so when it is piped to get to the stream, before it gets to that pipe through development standards that are in place now, we're trying to require best management practices that can, more artificially replace what might have been occurring naturally.
And our stream quality data shows that the Galloway Creek is one of the highest water quality streams citywide, and we recognize that, and we understand that you all want to keep it that way. And, the manual is very extensive. It'll give all kinds of examples and diagrams of how to slow the water flow and use best management practices on site for, slowing down the water, filtering the water. There's quite a lot that goes into that. So that's something that all new developers would be using here.
Are you aware if there are any water retention areas on the other side, like between Mentor and the backside of the new developments? Because there are some undeveloped areas back there that seem like they're natural water retention areas that we might look to hold on to some of those, because then it maybe wouldn't all go directly into the stream. And some of it could be on the back end. Do you guys know if there's any?
I'm trying to remember on that. On Jessica, do you remember if there's detention on your? I was thinking more on your property, even going down Allen.
Are you talking about further east? Are you talking about way?
You're thinking
Behind
farther
the trailer
east.
park
Yeah,
and
no,
also
okay.
between the backside of the apartments in that region. Because I know it does go downhill in some areas back there that seem like they're natural stormwater retention areas. Just wondering if that could be an option.
Well, basically going back to our recommendations, it will be to use the best management practices, the manual, not give exceptions to the stream buffer requirement in this area, and look at that very closely. We're going to be encouraging innovative stormwater management techniques to keep water on site as much as possible on private developments, things like green roofs, bioswales, rain gardens, gray water catchment and reuse systems, preserving existing vegetation where possible, use of native vegetation, and of course trees. This was a photo taken just the other day of the creek, and it's very, looking at it, it has some vegetation, it has rocks, it looks like it's a really good quality creek right now. And to, of course, protect the tree canopy of the Galloway area. That's one of the defining characteristics in the area. It's been a top priority for everyone here. I know that the Stakeholder Committee even talked about a special pilot ordinance whenever we brought in our Public Works tree preservation expert, and you all are going to be having him come and talk about the Neighborhoods program, and so I think it can be kind of a joint effort. I should have mentioned this number one actually before we started these recommendations. The City of Springfield is embarking on the comprehensive planning process citywide, and we recognize that some of these issues have actually come up, through other neighborhoods, and maybe not just Galloway, but we should look citywide at what kind of a tree preservation ordinance we should have. We're still going to recommend that this be a major priority, and that Galloway could be a pilot for an ordinance like that to City Council. But there's quite a lot that would go into that. So we mentioned that the city should aggressively pursue tree planting and preservation measures on public property in the area, the right-of-way, the greenway trails, the public park. There's an estimated 200 trees that could be planted along the greenway trail through there, and I think right now there was 83 acres of existing tree canopy not taking into account the quarry site. So there's a lot of mature tree canopy here now. And the idea would be to preserve the healthy trees whenever possible and install high-quality landscaping to enhance the area. So the type of natives that would be around for 100 years and provide that habitat. So that's kind of, or in a nutshell, on the natural environment. So I mentioned we had 2 boards on image enhancement recommendations. This board here really gets at the park and trail amenities. Everyone said they want those to be preserved and enhanced. We understand they're highly used ideas that came up that actually someone wrote in on a Post-it note and then ended up being real popular after the first meeting was improved restroom facilities in the park. Added drinking fountains, seating areas, more shade. That gets back to adding our tree canopy there. And here's one about planting trees along Galloway Creek Greenway Trail and Sequoia Park to add shade, rejuvenate the tree canopy, and Public Works and Parks staff estimate up to 200 trees could be planted. We mentioned that. And this is something that we also recommend coordination with the community groups like the Tree City USA. Rotary has a goal for every Rotarian to plant a tree, and I think City Utilities is even donating some trees. So there are some organizations out there that the neighborhood could work with on some tree planting as well. And to develop pocket parks. And these would just be very small areas or larger areas of space where people could kind of rest or relax, have a picnic, seating along the trail, maybe a few little plantings. It really doesn't take a lot of space to make an impact with something like that. And of course, protect the natural features of the area, to limit the excessive grading or rock blasting, limit the height of retaining walls, and also require minimum distance between tiers. So these were some photos. You all had given me some great photos and ideas at one of our meetings. This one was taken in Eureka Springs. And Eureka Springs is a great example of how you can build into the existing terrain, because they've done it there in a historic area and done a great job of it, and it's landscaped to soften it so that you don't just have those big blank walls of cinder block or brick or something like that. And of course, continuing with the high-quality landscaping and inspect these projects during and after construction to ensure compliance with the landscaping requirements. So I know we didn't include the photo in here of the CBS. Everybody knows it and has seen it. We try to include, the good photos. And that was something that John McNabb had recommended, maybe looking at, 8 foot as a height restriction, maybe 6 foot as a depth restriction. Interestingly, it was not a very high priority coming back on the second public survey. It was probably one of the lowest. Not to say, isn't that interesting?
It is.
I'm wondering if people didn't really understand completely or recognize what we were saying, because the idea would be, rather than just leveling the terrain, you kind of want to keep that look, Continuing on the image enhancement, this is where we get more into the new development type of recommendations. Whenever you all were talking about village feel, and we heard the public talking about village feel, we were saying, okay, well, let's dive down, and what does that really mean? We thought it means walkable, pedestrian-friendly, a more human scale, or I think Mark had called it village scale a few minutes ago. Something that's welcoming. I think that was one of your words, Jessica, make the district very welcoming to people. Things like planters and window boxes, brightly colored doors or building accents. These could be canopies or done through just some eye-catching doorways even, the use of color, public art, fountains, dog watering stations, outdoor seating, street trees. Good developments, often you can't tell where the public space ends and the private space begins, so lots of opportunity for outdoor interaction kind of goes with the vision statement. Encourage the appropriate density of multifamily development using the multifamily matrix in order to comply with adopted city policies, encouraging greater access for all citizens, public amenities such as parks, trails, and supportive, inclusive, equitable development in the area. And then we get into the developing of the design guidelines or other land use restrictions, talking about limiting the building height and glazing, sign regulations, and parking lots. That was something we talked about quite a lot, that parking lots, when possible, limit the impervious surface on the site, limit the building or parking lot size to encourage more green space, and then have trees in the parking lots to have them attractively landscaped and placed behind the buildings where feasible. We talked about this quite a bit. I know there were several people who said they didn't like the idea of a sea of parking in front of the building, but traditionally the buildings that are down there do have like a row of parking in front of them. And you think about Galloway Grill and some of the stores and things that are down there. And, there's something to be said for having some front door parking there. But then I think even some of the existing developments have done a real good job of having then additional parking behind and even a tiered approach. So that's basically what we have here. We have some just examples. I think you all remember seeing this. This was an example of just like an all-glass building that just seemed too modern and not to really fit the village feel, whereas when you look at what's there now, maybe 30 to 40% of glass windows and doors on the sides would probably be more appropriate. And these are some examples of some good signage in the area. It's appropriately sized, placed close to the building, not really in your face on the street. That might be more appropriate on Sunshine and Glintstone. I actually love the Andy's Ice Cream Cone sign there, but maybe not so much in this area. You know what I mean? So without the backlighting, LED lights, or electronics. And our final is our general recommendations. And this would just be kind of an overarching, this is one for everyone to do, is continue to build relationships and communication between all the area stakeholders, the city departments, the neighborhood, the development community, the businesses, and any other groups that are formed, community improvement district that's in development now, to help further the vision for the area. We think that we should continue to raise awareness of upcoming public input opportunities when that happens, encourage the two-way information sharing. I think that's been really very helpful, to know what everybody's really thinking, and give input on the front end. And emphasize the history and character of the area. This was you all have probably seen this, the old teapot. I wish that was still there. It's not there anymore, but I like the idea of just showing what kind of a funky destination this was back in the day, the Teapot Tavern. And, that Ozarks First article that was written, have you all read some of that? It's a pretty good article about the history of Galloway and how it was such a destination for tourism and commerce back in the day, with the Chadwick Flyer that brought people through. They would spend the day, picnicking, or they had a fish hatchery. They had a lot of markets and trading and things like that. So preserving existing buildings that reflect that history and heritage, like the rock structures. Interested property owners may want to consider working with a qualified historic professional to conduct a historic resource survey. That's something other areas of town have done before. And research and document the important historic places, determine if certain structures may be eligible for listing on the local or the national register. And of course, our final one here, and I think some of you all provided me with some of these photos. Then I went back online. You brought some to the meeting on your homework assignment, and then we were able to find some enhanced landscaping and beautification and future public improvements. So, I know Eric's team has taken in some input on potential roundabout landscaping. I know there were comments about using some native rock, maybe limestone from the quarry or something that was reminiscent of the old rock structures in the center with some native landscaping, maybe some public art, maybe use creek gravel or even some salvaged materials. For the roundabouts, and make sure that they are maintained. I think that's going to be one of the things that would have to be worked out, since Public Works, doesn't necessarily have the staff to water plants. If you wanted to put plants in there that did require watering for a pop of color or something, which could be really cool, I think. And this is an example. I think that was it Wendy or who provided this one? In Sedona, Arizona. I liked here, of course, it's nothing like the Ozarks, but you can tell they used native desert stone. Here they have a crane or some type of bird representing their wildlife and some art, but yet it's still very open and low maintenance looking, so you're not inhibiting your vision as you're coming through the roundabout type area. So our plan is take these recommendations forward to the public meeting on the 9th. How do we get there? So this is something that staff talked about. You all know the administrative delay expires August 2nd. That is coming up, here we are, a month from today, right? Here we are, July 2nd. So with the staff constraints, the first we talked about, let's recommend an overlay zoning district. Something where you could write all of this in. We talked to Bob about that and how that would go. Well, that's something that takes time. And we're working through the comprehensive planning process that just started. So it's something where we talked about, could you hire an outside consultant? How do you go about this? This is going to take time. The administrative delay is going to be passed. So something that we thought would be an alternative that would be quicker would be to recommend that City Council adopt these recommendations as a policy document. So basically, we take these all forward to them in a document, present it to them at the City Council lunch coming up on July 23rd, get their feedback, they'll want some time for some public input, but a policy document, like we have the Commercial Street Strategy for Success and different, the Jordan Valley Concept Plan, those can be adopted, if I'm right, Mary, in a one reading bill. That would be a resolution. It would allow, public comment at the city council meeting, and then we would have this policy document for any new development that comes forward. It would be evaluated based on this policy document with staff. So that means if someone comes in and, propose something that seems completely out of whack, we point back to this. Here's our policy document regulating this area. And I should point out, we had talked about the boundaries. We know we have the administrative delay boundary. We know we have the Chapter 99 incentives boundary, the blight district. But we felt like these recommendations should apply to anything with frontage along Lone Pine. We recognize that even though we have vacant land there, it's not necessarily developable. It's owned, there's land that's owned by the quarry. They're going to continue using that as a quarry, and that's fine. That's actually great, But in the future, if they were to sell off property with frontage along Lone Pine, if someone were to come through to develop that, we would want these elements to apply to that development, as well as along Galloway, since that's a major gateway into the district. So at one of our meetings, I think we got out the black Sharpie. That was at your place, 80, Firehouse Pottery, and looked at that. So this is a first draft, and I need to get in here and make sure we have all our street names spelled correctly before we take it to City Council. But to let you know a general idea, and the reason this doesn't look like a hard and fast boundary is we didn't want it to. We didn't want to cut off anyone's property lines or say that it's really like a hard and fast boundary line, but generally any new development that would occur within this area, our original study area, adding Galloway, and this would actually go to Luster. So that way it would encompass, the intersection there as well. And then down to Republic Road, which is what we talked about with this frontage, generally about 300 feet through this area. So this would be the Galloway area boundary that would accompany the policy document. Yes?
Olivia, why do we not want to include Republic Road?
I don't know, actually. I think maybe we had a little bit of a discussion about that. I don't know if that really takes in the village feel of the area. I can understand where it's kind of a gateway into it, but we hadn't really discussed it in a lot of detail, and we hadn't discussed it at the staff and managers level. So we thought, as much as possible, let's stick with our original study area, except for where it really makes sense. Are you thinking that this?
Well, I think if we look at the map that we drew on at Firehouse, that is included. Republic Road was included. The thought was that property at the top of the hill, we think that's going to develop commercially. And so the question is there then going to be sort of a domino effect down that hill? And do we want to, since we've spent the time to do the work, do we want to put these guidelines in place for property along Republic Road, at least up to the edge of that large undeveloped piece that's at the top of the hill, to preserve that down there, or just allow that sort of right here?
You're talking about the 80 acres that's on the...
At the top of the hill right there,
yeah.
As you come around.
Great visibility, bad access.
Right.
Is there a reason that we're excluding just right across the other side of the intersection where Galloway Grill is, and that property that just sold across from it? Because it seems like to me, that's all part of Galloway, and it would be nice to keep that cohesive and have a really
to go south of Republic.
Yeah, which would probably work with what Randall was saying, because I imagine that depth back further south would be what it would it would align with going
up the hill.
Yes, up the hill. So I think that would be a natural.
Mm-hmm. What do you all think, Bob, Mary? I mean,
has that been a part of your conversation? You said that was drew on the maps at one point about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were just kind of, at that point, people were talking about, well, if we're going to do something through here, maybe the administrative delay boundary was not all-encompassing.
Right.
Right.
Right, and that's why we decided to go up Galloway.
Right.
Because potentially that could develop differently than it is today, and so we wanted to do that. But
it seems to me that from a planning perspective, that 80 acres that's up there laying up against James River Freeway has much more relationship to Glenstone and James River Freeway than it does to Galloway.
right, that's why we stopped before we got there. That we just did that row.
So you're
row
thinking
of
right
properties.
about to here?
Exactly. Because we knew that really wasn't part of the village,
Mm-hmm.
and it is different because it sets on James River Freeway.
Mm-hmm.
But as you then start down that hill, I mean,
I think that those properties, because they are different than any other place that we're talking about, because they are bounded by the 80-acre field, I think the field and those properties need to have the same either constraints or non-constraints. Because if you add these constraints to those property owners, and I mean I live next to those people, you are then punishing those property owners while leaving the field open for development unconstrained. And that to me seems punitive in this moment.
You know, I don't have personally.
But I think the development on down Lone, when you said extending Lone Pine, I think it needs to go all the way down Lone Pine if we're going to say Lone Pine and not stop at Republic Road.
We tried. Let me just give you kind of the background on where we were thinking with this, because I don't necessarily disagree. You know, I remember in our discussion we were talking, really broad, this and this. But council, when they directed us to do this, gave us the focus of this specific boundary. I don't even know what council is going to think whenever we recommend expanding it this much. And there was some concern, I would say, about putting limitations on the property that's owned by Conco, which we're already doing by taking in two sides of their property. Do we want to take in a third side? And I actually did have a conversation with management at Conco about this, because if they weren't supportive of it, we didn't want to take it through. And I'm not going to say it's been all the way up the chain, but, we have to think about the quarry site and that they've owned this for a very long time and used it as a quarry for a very long time, and we don't want to be restricting their. What we want to do is do the best we can for the Galloway area, but try to keep it narrowed and focused. Republic Road's a hard boundary that makes a lot of sense, and that's what we had from the beginning. I am open to the rest of the staff that's more focused on development than I am, though. So
I would agree. I think that you got your Galloway Grill and all that. Seems like that's your entranceway into the. At the very least, that's another entryway into the.
So you're thinking maybe extend it south of Republic some?
At
If it's not that much, because pretty soon you're in the similar area.
Yeah.
So I'm not worried about
True.
that or people.
Maybe we go back and look at this again with staff a little bit, Mary, or what are you thinking?
Well, I could see taking in the four corners of Galloway and Republic. I'm concerned about, council did set a boundary, and, I think we have to guard against mission creep in terms of what our authority was. And so by taking it up Republic Road, that wasn't included. I mean, we took it up Galloway, and that really wasn't included either.
Right.
So I think Galloway is probably a much more significant, has more impact on this area than Republic Road does.
And there were a lot of residents that live in this area that came to the public meetings and came to the meeting about the Galloway Road improvements. And a question that I heard several times was, well, does improving Galloway Street make it more attractive for development? Well, that's a good question. They're only going to be able to develop on this side if they buy property from the quarry, which
Mhm.
right now they're not selling property. But down the road, if we're going to be thinking really futuristic, you know, it might make sense to actually take that in.
The intersection, if they could possibly look at the intersection, that would be
at
really.
Lone Pine and
Just so
Republic,
we could keep it cohesive.
all four corners of that intersection, maybe.
Maybe extend a little bit down, yeah, all four corners, yeah.
So we're at about 300 feet off the center line, more or
Of
less.
the street,
it's
more or less. Yes.
Yeah. So something like that. I mean,
Like right here,
yeah.
Yeah.
Although
taking in Galloway Grill.
Yeah.
Galloway
Other
Grill,
side.
but at the southeast corner, there's not a house that backs right up to that, is there?
No,
But
right
it's
now
done
there's a couple
single
dumpsters,
family.
I think, that isn't there. So it might be nice to, because right on the southeast corner of that, I think we have a couple dumpsters right now.
And it looks like some pretty tall grass through that area. Well, let's look at that. We'll go back and take a look at it and circle the wagons as staff and see what we think we might do. But generally, I think this group liked the idea of adding Galloway to council. Now, we could take it to council and they say, no, we're just going to stick with the administrative delay boundary. But this would be staff's recommendation. And maybe we look at the potential of those four corners and see what city council thinks on that as well. So, what feedback do you all have? I know we've kind of been talking about it. Feedback on the boundaries. And I believe, Marcy, you came with some feedback on the vision statement and gave that to me, and I appreciate that. To try to actually condense it a little bit. So I'm going to look at that. I think that's good. I actually really like the vision statement. I think you all did a great job with that, and through the visioning workshop at the second public meeting, a lot of just the words that were taken down. And, you know, I thought I want to give City Council, when we present to them, just a one page on the PowerPoint, that list of all the different places that you guys researched as well. Like, you know, the Pella, Iowa, I think we used one of the photos there from their Tulip Festival on the image enhancement recommendations, and, you know, the places in Colorado that have done a good job building into the environment. Anyway, there's a really good list there that you all came up with. We have our background map that will be part of our report and presentation, and you all have seen this before, so we just have a few points on here, points of reference, something that's easy to give people an idea. And we mentioned the future street improvements, administrative delay boundary, and intersection improvement up here. And of course, we've got the park labeled, so this will be part of the final document as well as the Galloway boundary map. So we'd have both of those in there. So upcoming, we are going to have the July 9th meeting, 5:30 at All Saints Church, and we'll have all of these boards on easels. We'll have comment cards for everyone that attends, and I wanted to give these to whoever needs them for the yard signs. So, Melanie,
Maybe I'm still back at number 3, but
yeah.
maybe I don't understand. So we are going to roll out of the administrative delay without an overlay district in place that offers protections on building height, the maximum tier height, the setbacks. I mean, I'm just scrolling through the design standards that we had looked at a couple of meetings ago. The parking, limit the percent of impervious surface, the protections for the mature trees that we had talked about.
So all of that is going to be in this document. All of these will be put into a report with
But I'm
more
not seeing like
explanation.
limitations here that maybe I was mishearing, but I thought that we were rolling into something that would have a conditional overlay district with design limitations or standards. I think we've even talked about townhouses, townhomes, as opposed to apartments.
And that is mentioned in here. So townhomes and lower density residential, and in fact, our more extensive report document that will go to City Council talks about density and existing density that's there and what would be appropriate on limitations for that. So that would be part of that document. So, for example, right? Go ahead.
Did this group have an opportunity to review that document prior to it going to council at all?
No, it'll be presented to council, and it'll be available at the council lunch.
But we are still recommending as a staff that developments like, Township 28 and the other ones that are down there would still be appropriate in that area for many different reasons based on kind of a regional planning perspective, right, Mary?
Yeah, so Township 28 is at 20 dwelling units per acre, which is a fairly low density in our zoning ordinance. And I think that, so first off, just talking about it being adopted as a policy document. This is something that we've done as council's policy. Every development would be reviewed against it. We have a number of things that they have essentially the force of ordinance. For example, the requirement for all developers to hold a neighborhood meeting and to notify everyone within 500 feet. That was adopted by council as a policy, and it was that way for 7 years before it got codified into the zoning ordinance. So that's an example of something that has the effect where there was no varying from that. If you were doing a zoning case, you had to follow that policy or we didn't process. The multifamily design guidelines that are used in reviewing every single multifamily development were adopted originally as a policy document. They're now referred to in the zoning ordinance, but they actually are a policy document. But the actual design guidelines in the matrix are just a policy document. But again, that every development is reviewed against that, and staff bases its recommendation for or against it on that policy document. So as Olivia said, we can adopt that by resolution. Adopting a conditional overlay district would require months of working through those issues, engaging with a much larger group, engaging with the development community as a whole, and then a 90-day process to get it through council. And so the fastest way to achieve the goals, we believe, and the most effective way is to do a policy document right now. Some of the issues that have been discussed, for example, the tree canopy, is going to be an issue I think is going to come up through the comprehensive plan as a community goal, and that's really going to take a lot of time to flesh out. If council tells us on July 23rd, no, go do a conditional overlay district, it's not going to include a tree canopy policy in it to begin with, because that's a very complex issue, and it's also a staffing issue. And so we're going to have to take a lot of time and have a lot of conversations about, and when I say we, it's not us, it's the community, about the appropriateness of that. What does it look like? How do we pay for the staffing? Because we can't do it with existing staff. We can write it with existing staff, but we can't implement it with existing staff. So that's why we're looking at the policy document. Regarding the density issue, I think it's probably a pretty basic philosophical question here. The City Council spent a long time developing these multifamily design guidelines. I never can get this. It's multifamily location and design guidelines.
Yeah.
Location and design guidelines. And it's really looking at, it came about as a result of concern that there were too many apartments being built in the community as a whole, not in a specific area, but in the community as a whole. And council put in place a moratorium on multifamily developments while these design guidelines were being drafted. And I don't know, Randy, were you on the commission when we did those?
No.
So it predated you.
Yep.
And then we came back, we adopted them, and then we came back a year later after a year's experience with it. But it looked at, so where should denser development occur? And how do we provide opportunities for people of all incomes and all ages to access amenities in our community? And so you get, a developer gets extra points, and the points translate eventually into a density level. And you get extra points if you are near a park, if you're within a quarter mile of a park, quarter mile of a trail, if you're within a certain distance of community services, because we want people to be able to access them and not have to always get in their car to drive. And so from that perspective, this area is a candidate for some higher density. Now, we've run, the projects that are down there right now ran through the multifamily design guidelines. And like I said, the Township 28 is at 20 DUs per acre. Mm-hmm. Galloway Creek was less than that.
It was. I want to say 18 or something. We've got it all pulled,
yeah,
but I don't have it in front of me right now.
It was less than that. And so even though the zoning district for it may say, for example, if it were zoned residential high density, which I don't think anything is down there.
But even general retail allows a higher density, like 40 dwelling units per acre.
That you could go 40, but this matrix pulls you down. In fact, we rarely have anybody that can do the maximum that's allowed in their zoning district.
And in fact, we pulled the zoning cases and looked at them, and what they were asking for originally, once they went through the matrix, they usually had to come down a couple dwelling units per acre based on it.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think it's a challenge for us, because we hear what you all have been saying, but we also look at what the adopted policy is for the city, and look at that philosophical discussion about where is it appropriate to place a higher density, and how do we make our parks and our greenways accessible to all people, and not restricted to just a single family neighborhood. So staff's recommendation and as you know, what the council ordinance said was staff would come back with their recommendation. Staff's recommendation is that we continue to use the multifamily design guidelines in evaluating multifamily developments in this area.
I was just in Colorado Springs, Denver area, and they're facing the same thing with the multifamily everywhere. So it's not unique to Springfield.
No.
So if we're going to continue to increase the density of the Lone Pine corridor, it will continue to exacerbate the existing infrastructure problems. So what's the solution that's being recommended for that?
Well, by exacerbating the existing problems, are you talking about traffic or stormwater or what exactly? Because from a stormwater perspective, they are subject to all of our every development is subject to the regulations. And what we're saying with this policy document is that we don't recommend that we budge on things like the stream buffer, so we continue to preserve the water quality, the great water quality that currently exists in Galloway Creek. We're not recommending that there be any variance from any kind of stormwater requirements or any kind of traffic requirements that might be associated with new development.
And the new development could not put additional stormwater out beyond their property. So they're required with those best management practices to not exasperate or add a drop of stormwater to the issue. So they have to have those controls on site to deal with any stormwater. That's why we were talking about the green roofs, or of course there's always the detention areas and some of those. Ron can talk more about all of those things, but there's a whole list of things that they can do to ensure that they're not adding to any type of flooding.
Well, we have our stormwater group that reviews all the developments for those, whether those are detention basins or whether they're other types of devices that just kind of capture and filter and release the water, so that, I mean, if you create more of a hard surface, you can create more water potentially leaving the site because it doesn't sink into the ground as much as before. So you got to control the rate at which it runs off, so at least you're not increasing the rate of the runoff and then worsening flooding problems downstream that cumulatively can take place. And then while you're doing that, you should also be working on treating that water through some best management practices on site so that you're, again, not creating particulate in the runoff that is getting into the stream that is worsening the water quality in the stream.
From a traffic perspective, we're taking care of, we're doing the improvements to Galloway, again, adding the sidewalks, the bicycle trails. As far as the actual capacity of the road, I mean, we're and that was one of the things we wanted to share early on. We're not anticipating this being a 4-lane road or anything like that. It's 2 lanes today. We're moving to 3 lanes, but I mean, it's still just 1 lane in each direction. The center turn lane just helps with safety and some of those issues. As we see future development, which is pretty limited, honestly, as you look up Lone Pine from Galloway. But each one of those developments, as they would come in and rezone, we would, if they produce more than 1,000 vehicles over the course of a day or 100 vehicles in a peak hour, we would make them do a traffic study. And then again, any kind of improvements that we would see would have to accommodate any kind of future need that we would have there.
And actually, that's a good point, because as you look at the properties and what really is the remaining development potential in this corridor.
For that,
Yeah,
so you can see the property lines a little bit
Yeah.
better.
So what are the remaining development sites in this corridor? Obviously, you have the property that Mitch Jenkins purchased in that area, which is probably which I assume is the prime redevelopment site there. You have the property that was rezoned up at Battlefield and Lone Pine. And so then you kind of get into this, well, what are the eventualities? Does Kit Carson's property, which adjoins the GR property up there, when and if does that become available? And how does that impact this section of Lone Pine? And does it really impact this section of Lone Pine? Or do most of those people travel out to Battlefield and then disperse? They don't come down here because there's not really a good connection back unless you're accessing a business through here. And then the next big unknown is when or if the frontage around the quarry develops. I mean, that's where you have some actual land mass that would create quite a bit of development opportunity.
Yeah, right here about this.
And then you have the vault company is the other piece.
And right across the street from the vault company, they're residential, but they've been purchased by the same company. Because that's right around where I live, and that's one of our concerns.
Like around this area?
North.
Up here?
No, right there.
Here. Oh, okay.
Right, not by the park, but just there's residents. It's hard to see from back here, and how far back those lots
Those
go.
are really long lots.
They're very
They
long
go all the
lots.
way to the
Yeah. And the people
lake.
who were living there when they were selling a garage sale were very vocal on who bought them. So that's a concern for my neighbors and myself.
Well, it's
And
a
that's
single
gonna be-
family.
Yeah. And
Right now it is.
That's going to be a strange,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be hard for us to support much there. Well, I'm just looking, looking at it because, so the Wilbert Vault place, obviously that's a manufacturing site, and it's going to be redeveloped as something because it's not going to be manufactured. It has some frontage along Lone Pine. I know it takes some of its access off of Barton as well. But when you look at those properties on the north side, they don't have access to Lone Pine. They're up against the park. And I understand that somebody's bought all of them, and I anticipate at some point they'll come in for a land development inquiry and say, what can I get this rezoned to?
Multifamily.
And, yeah.
Mostly, it'd probably be.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's hard to imagine, though, that, I don't see us allowing, because that won't qualify very
Commercial.
well for density
No.
because of the Barton
Barton,
access. And,
anyone
yeah.
who's been on Barton knows how narrow it is.
Yeah, well, and the weird little
Yes, it is. Especially when you
reverse
walk through
curve.
Yeah.
One of the reasons too we put this in is, it's zoned heavy manufacturing right now. A lot of this, the zoning is pretty limiting for them to develop. They have to come forward for a rezoning, and it would be evaluated against the policy document. And I may have skipped over one of the image enhancement recommendations, but we do have in there to limit certain uses that we pulled up through the zoning district that are currently allowed in general retail, and also mentioned that we were going to limit any new manufacturing uses. The manufacturing list in the zoning district is pretty long on what they allow in there. So, things that would be, heavy.
I don't think we can limit with existing zoning.
Well, we would not limit like the quarry uses or anything like that.
We would limit any new manufacturing zoning.
Okay,
Not
new
so,
manufacturing
yeah.
zoning.
Because we can't come in
We
and
can't
strip
come in.
out their
Right.
uses.
Yeah, so this
Okay.
property right here, this GM right now, all the uses that are allowed in the GM district would be allowed currently.
Okay.
So we can't, with this policy, it's not going to be able
Yeah.
to take away those.
Well, we mentioned in this policy that even some uses allowed in general manufacturing, we would suggest be limited, like
And
the
if there's
drive-throughs.
If there's a rezoning, we could do that with a conditional overlay district to remove it. But any zoning you have along this strip, right now, currently, it's going to be pretty limited of what we can do with a policy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
The only thing we
if
can
a
really do
single
with
family was rezoned to general retail,
then we could do that, yes.
You can limit.
then you could limit it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. But to come in now and limit somebody
Be like
with
a
general
taking.
manufacturing and say, well, you can't do certain uses, essentially
Taking.
we've done a taking.
Yeah.
There's a lawsuit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they could come in and do a storage unit or a gas station or a drive-through
Right there.
restaurant. Right, I don't either. Not right there.
No.
But they could.
Well, and the quarry said they're not a developer. They're not going to develop sites to rent them out for business or anything like that. But down the road, corporations change hands. If they were to sell some of this property and someone wanted to
If they rezone
develop
then
it, and they rezone it, then we could limit those
Then
uses.
the
Policy
policy
would
would
come.
apply.
Yeah.
Right.
Gotcha.
Policy would apply to all
Any
reasons.
different. They have indicated that the quarry has at least another 100 years useful life. So,
Wow.
Yeah, we probably would.
in the near future.
And I know they've talked with the Parks Department. That's probably a lot more likely scenario that part of it could become an extension of Secretariat Park with some really cool recreation, with all the elevation change in there. So,
Rock climbing.
yeah, exactly. Zip lining, rock climbing,
Mm-hmm.
mountain biking. Yep.
How was it?
Okay. What else? I do have postcards for the next public meeting. You all know that you're invited to attend the city council lunch, and I have several RSVPs already written down. Yeah, if you would, maybe what I should have you do is maybe I'll just pass this around, and everybody that's going to attend that's not staff, just write your name on this, because I'll give this to the city clerk's office, and lunch is provided. I think it would be good. A lot of staff comes in and sits. City council sits at the table. There'll be a table kind of like this, and they'll sit around and be having their lunch during the presentation, and it's their time to have Q&A with staff. And then there's some seating. Cora, where do you think a good place to seat the stakeholders would be? Because I definitely plan on right up front just introducing the stakeholders. Make sure you guys raise your hand.
On either side.
Yeah.
Either
Either
side.
side.
Okay.
That'll be good.
Okay, yeah, so either side
There
and
should be enough room.
anything else they need to know for that. It is an open public meeting. Sometimes the media shows at some of these, but it's not a time where there's any speaking opportunities really.
That's right.
That's only as
It's their study session, so unless they call on people from the audience, it's not a specific public hearing.
Right. So, following that, we'll be looking for council's direction in how to proceed. So, any other last
Council
thoughts?
adopts this, will that come to P&Z for a public hearing?
And that would be actually before we go to city council. We're talking about maybe August 26th for a potential city council resolution. So I've got the dates back at my office, but I know I was talking about submitting a staff report very soon, pulling it together.
For your August meeting?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it would allow multifamily, there would be no height restrictions.
Be subject to the bulk plane that all properties are subject to.
So, am I not, I'm looking to these two to help me recalibrate my expectations. So we'll continue to follow the existing zoning and city guidelines, and this won't add additional protections beyond that. Is that the summary of where we're at?
It will add the policy statements,
documents.
the policy documents.
But in term, I guess I'm still stuck on the design standards that we had gone over and talked about.
So that's
Specificity.
That's why it looks a little different. It's categorized under the 2 image enhancement boards here. So under image enhancement is where we talk about limiting glazing, sign restrictions, everything on those 2 boards.
But it doesn't give a building height, and what we're talking about right now is the limit on the building height would be the normal zoning and bulk plane allowances.
So I feel like what gave rise to this in the first place was the neighborhood expressing concern about the rapid development that's been happening. So if we come out of this and we say we've spent 270 days to say we're fine with that continuing, it's not gonna be good with the neighborhood. We're gonna continue with the same problems, and we're still gonna be having the same concerns as when we went into this, because it's not being accounted for that these apartments aren't filled yet. These apartments aren't finished yet. And we're going to go ahead and say that we're allowing more. We don't know how many new school children are coming.
They're already sharing classrooms.
We're flooding already. We've got wrecks happening on the Greenway.
This weekend.
I think council was pretty clear when they talked about the moratorium that their intent was not to stop development. It was how to accommodate development.
But there have been questions along the way that have led the neighborhood to believe that additional restrictions might be placed.
That's what we're doing through the policy document.
Yeah, so I think they are. I think maybe it's not extremely clear. It's not laid out with a hard and fast that says no one can build above 2 stories. So that's not going to be in the policy. But some designs that you all may have previously seen on developments that were proposed that showed a big sea of parking and demolishing historic structures and a 4-story certain design, that would not, under this policy, that would not fit the guidelines of this policy and would not be something that staff would recommend. So you are getting something else out of it that wasn't there before. We'd say, okay, what we're recommending is you design your development in a way that maximizes preservation of any historic buildings on the site that are important to the community, that you position most of your parking lot behind your building instead of in front, that you take into account all of these design elements for how it looks on the front, with the village feel, with the glazing, signage, use of natural materials, elevated landscaping in the area, because we're going to say, okay, the community has told us that here are their priorities for this area. If you're going to develop in it, you're working within a context of the natural environment, the slope terrain, and the development that already exists. So we don't want something that sticks out like a sore thumb here. It's got to fit.
Okay, so to comply with that, then do they have to show you a plan? And that is the plan that they're bound to? Because previously we were told, well, we don't have to have a plan to request a rezoning.
Right. But in order to show us that they're complying with the adopted policy, I'm not sure how they could show us that they were complying unless they present a plan.
Okay.
With elevations.
And more than likely, we'd probably do a plan development on something like that. It would be not just your typical run-of-the-mill zoning case. It would be with a plan development, would have renderings and some site plan and all that.
Or conditional overlay district that includes
has all that.
Includes the site plan and the elevations. Yeah.
But that would be something that we would go to planning and zoning whenever they request the zoning and discuss with them at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we recognize going into it, every person is not going to get everything they want out of this or be completely happy with all of it, because everybody's priorities are a little bit different and there are a lot of different groups. But I think as a staff, we're pretty happy with the compromise and what we're recommending going forward, for this area and the community. I mean, it's a great area. It really is. And it's very attractive right now for development. But, this is a natural thing that kind of occurs because you've got such a mix of different uses there. So much single family, so much multifamily, and then some great businesses and, the greenway trails and all of that. I know there's a lot of things you want to preserve. It's probably a really good time to do this. Mm-hmm. I mean, and we even discussed as a staff, we don't really even know what City Council is going to do. I personally will tell you, I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know. One option could be that they don't even recommend this or adopt it as a policy manual. One option is they just say, just proceed as we've been going. But this would be a really good thing, I feel like, for the area. So, I don't know, anything else that we're forgetting? I really appreciate all the time and effort you guys have put into it. You've attended lots of meetings, not just stakeholder meetings, but, the traffic meetings, the public meetings, helped get the word out, gone and taken things to your other constituency groups and got stuff out. Greenways did a good job of filling out surveys as well, because there's lots of Greenways users in the area.
They're kind of a local group, too.
Yeah. Well, I could tell after the first survey when it's like 75% of these people are riding their bikes weekly. I was like, wow.
The meeting in a week, is that going to be more like the first one where it's an open house, come and go type of thing, as opposed to the middle one?
Yes. So it won't be any type of a facilitated workshop or discussion. What we're going to have is all of these boards on easels, comment cards for everyone. We'll do some type of a welcome, whether we have a council person or myself, or someone will do a welcome and thank the church, for being so accommodating, which they really have been for us, and let folks know where we are and moving forward. So we'll take all the comment cards then. We'll be providing feedback to City Council on public comments that we've heard, and be able to wrap this piece of it up. So
I think this policy will be a really good thing, having sat through a lot of zoning meetings on the side of the developer, but also on the other side as well. Council is very concerned with setting precedents and following policies and procedures, and something like this allows for council to point to something and challenge certain decisions based on the policy, which, if not otherwise there, might be very cut and dry. This is how it's written and this is how it's done, regardless of how you feel about it. Whereas this allows a little more discussion, engagement. So I think I'm happy with it.
And it sounds like even mindful about doing something in a timely fashion.
Exactly. That was a big concern, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And a concern that I heard from some people on this group, like, okay, the administrative delay is expiring. You know, what could we do in a timely manner before the next development proposal comes forward? Well, this is something that we could do right away. And, you know, just from my experience, when we developed a kind of a similar type of a framework was the Commercial Street Strategy for Success. It was very similar to this type of a document, more of a planning document that had community engagement. And now, I mean, we have any liquor license that's going to go in on Commercial Street comes to the city departments for input, and one of them, they come to planning and ask Mary and I, does this business model fit with the Commercial Street Strategy for Success? Nowhere else in town has that, but Commercial Street said, gosh, you know, we're a dense area, we're a unique area, you know, our buildings share property lines, you know, we want to know if there's a business that's going to be open until 1 a.m. and, you know, what are their plans for? So they have to have plans for responsible hospitality. Their servers have to go to special training. A special group was developed for that. And that's all through I don't even know if you even call it a policy guide, but yeah, it's like a planning document, but that's our charge is we're supposed to come up with a determination, does this fit, and send it to the director of finance. So, and that's something that I think has worked really well. Most of the time, I'll say whatever comes through is a good fit. But we've had some where, oh, well, this one's been located downtown and the police have been called every other day. Well, we're not going to recommend for them to open another location right in our historic district, you know. So it's just one of these things, you know, how does it fit? How is it designed? How's it managed? Those types of things. Thank you all so much.
Well, and thank you, because I think there's been a lot of time and effort put into hearing everyone and you know, listening to the concerns, and we truly appreciate that. We really do.
Thank you. Well, it's been a pretty fun project to work on. I can't say that I wasn't going in thinking I needed a hard hat, but we'll see how the city council meeting goes. But no, you guys have all been great to work with and a great example for, you know, bringing your opinions forward, even if they're different, but being very civil about it and really leading that charge with the public. So, appreciate it.
Thank you. Good job, Lydia.
Yay, thank you, Laura.
Thank you. You did it.
I did it. I did it. I did it. I did it. I did it. I did it. I did it. I did it. I did it. I did it. I did it. I did it. I did it.